Hey guys, welcome back. Hope you had a great weekend. We're going to get right back into our daily studies. Today we're looking at starting our study of 3rd John, another nice short book. It is real brief, 14 verses. Yeah, 14 verses. So let's get into this. Today we're going to read through it and talk about kind of the summary of it. And tomorrow we'll get into the outline and looking at it in more detail. It's a good book. So let's read this. Verse 1, the elder under the beloved Gaius, whom I love in the truth. Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospereth. For I rejoiced greatly when the brethren came and testified of the truth that is in thee, even as thou walkest in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. Beloved, thou doest faithfully whatsoever thou doest to the brethren and to strangers, which have borne witness of thy charity before the church, whom if thou bring forward on their journey after a godly sort, thou shalt do well, because that for his name's sake they went forth, taking nothing of the Gentiles. Verse 8, we therefore ought to receive such, that we might be fellow helpers of the truth. I wrote unto the church, but Diotrephes, who loveth to have the preeminence among them, receiveth us not. Wherefore, if I come, I will remember his deeds which he doeth, prating against us with malicious words, and not content therewith. Neither doth he himself receive the brethren, and forbiddeth them that would, and casteth them out of the church. Beloved, follow not that which is evil, but that which is good. He that doeth good is of God, but he that doeth evil hath not seen God. Demetrius hath good report of all men, and of the truth itself. Yea, and we also bear record, and ye know that our record is true. I had many things to write, but I will not with ink and pen write unto thee. But I trust I shall shortly see thee, and we shall speak face to face. Peace be to thee. Our friends salute thee. Greet the friends in my name. Greet the friends by name, excuse me. So, we understand that John wrote this, and he identifies himself in verse 1 as the elder. But who's he writing to? Well, we can kind of get some clues on this by verse 1. He says, the elder unto the beloved Gaius, whom I love in the truth. Now, we don't know specifically who Gaius is, but we know some details about who he may be. I personally believe that he is. If we look at Romans chapter 16, this is the last chapter of the book of Romans that Paul is writing, and he's giving his kind of final greetings. He's saying, make sure the people that I know in Rome, that you say hi to them, and the people that you may know greet you. And in fact, even those who you don't know, they're greeting you anyways. And in verse 23, he says that Gaius greets them. He says that he is Paul's host. Paul was staying in Gaius's house. In fact, it says he's the host of all the church in the city where he is. Now, according to church tradition, Paul was writing the book of Romans from Corinth. So that's interesting. If we understand that Gaius is a Corinthian believer that has the church in his house, he is someone who is used to inviting people into his house. He invited Paul into his house to stay with him. So he's familiar with this, and that's what John's writing about here. We know a little bit more about him possibly if we go to Acts chapter 18. That's when Paul first goes to Corinth and starts the church there. He goes to the synagogue first, and what we find in verses 5 through 7, really, 5 to 6, some of the Jews accepted what he was believing and believed on Christ, but some of them didn't. In fact, it says that they began to blaspheme. So Paul shakes off his raiment. He shakes the dust off him, and he says, your blood be on your hands. I'm clean. I'm leaving. I'm going to the Gentiles. So he leaves. He walks out of the synagogue, and he's all mad and angry, and how can they reject this? And he's upset, and he goes right next door to a man named Titus Justus, who was a Gentile, but was a follower of Judaism, who's converted to Judaism. He was a God follower, as is called. And many scholars believe that this man, Titus Justus, may have actually been Gaius Titus Justus, and that is the one who One of the first converts, one of the few people that Paul actually baptized himself in Corinth. Many scholars believe that this is the same man whom John is writing to here, and that it is the one who housed the church in Corinth. So that may be. We don't know exactly, but I think that's a pretty good understanding of this. So what is John writing to him about? Well, as we talked about in 2 John, there were people who were traveling itinerant preachers, if you will, who would go from town to town, much as Paul did, and they would teach in the church. And they would give doctrine, they would give truth. But there were some that weren't teaching truth. They were teaching error. And that's what 2 John talked about. He says, don't receive those, don't eat with them, don't bid them Godspeed, because if you do that, you're partaking of their evil deeds. This is the other side of it. There was this guy named Diotrephes, who we see in verse 9, who was a leader in the church, most likely in the church at Corinth, where Gaius was. And he was, in a sense, a dictator over the church. He was having the preeminence. Well, nothing happens in this church that doesn't go through me, and what I say goes. And he wasn't receiving those brothers, those fellow Christians who were coming by to teach the truth. He wasn't receiving them. He wasn't listening to them. In fact, he said, if you, as one of these church members in this place, if you receive these itinerant preachers, then you're kicked out of the church as well. Well, John heard of this and said, this can't happen. We can't allow this to happen. We have to take care of each other as the body of Christ. Christ said that all men will know you're my disciples by your love one for another, not by kicking people out of the church and being a lord over the church and ruling it with an iron fist. That's not how God set things up. In fact, John wrote to the church in verse 9, he says this, but Diotrephes didn't receive it. He said, we're not listening to that. So John really kind of takes a sidestep around Diotrephes and says, well, I'm going to write to Gaius then. Gaius, whom I love, Gaius, whom he knew. They had fellow friends, as we see in verse 14. And he says, I'm going to talk to Gaius and write to him, say, hey, I'm coming to you shortly. We have a lot to talk about, and we need to take care of this situation. But before that, you need to start working on this situation, guys. You need to be receiving these people because, in verse 8, we therefore ought to receive such. Those that are itinerant truth teachers, we need to receive them and take care of them while they're with us so that we can send them on their way so that they can be blessed and so that we can be fellow helpers of the truth. So that's kind of the summary of what we'll be talking about this week. I hope you guys are excited about it. Make sure you're in the Word on a daily basis. Make sure you're coming back and listening to these studies and getting into it. Leave your thoughts and comments as we get into this further. And I hope you guys have a great day. Thanks.